Hello and welcome to the 200th episode of Moderate Fantasy Violence. Woo! Yeah, made it to the big 200. Who'd have thought? This is a podcast about more than 400 pieces of pop culture and lots about the world around it. I'm Alastair.
And I'm Nick.
And in the special 200th episode, we will be resurrecting the old recommendations section and discussing a story that's a favourite to one of us and new to the other. First, we'll be talking about Nick's recommendation to me, the Transformers comic More Than Meets the Eye, and then we'll be talking about my recommendation to Nick, Wes Anderson's 2001 film, The Royal Tenembaums. But before we dive into that, Nick, do you have something to recommend to the listeners?
Yeah, as befits this mammoth 200th episode, I have actually finished my big 2023 viewing project, a solid 3 months early. I finished watching all of Justified and the recent follow-up sequel series, Justified, City Primeval. I did talk about this, I think, when I was just getting into the first season or two of the project in a month earlier in the year, probably February, March. And this is, of course, the neo-western starring Timothy Olyphant, sort of reprising his cowboyish role from Deadwood, as Marshal Valen Givens, a no-nonsense chap whose specialist move is, well, to be honest, trying to manipulate the criminals into positions when he can justify shooting them. But we sort of let him off, because he's a sort of a cool, smart-talking, funny cowboy chap. And yep, the TV show, the original 6-season run, focused on him being sent back from the big city after one of his clever shootings didn't quite go his way, to the town where he first came from, the slightly more backwater town of Harlan in Kentucky, where he was forced to reconnect with his roots and deal with all the idiots' local trash that he'd been hoping to leave behind. The show is, I think, pretty well regarded. I think it's one of the better reviewed shows of its time, and they did 6 seasons. It was all pretty good. It finished on a high. Valen was finally forced to confront the fact that sometimes he can't just get people to let him shoot them, and he walks off into the source of sunset. Normally I wouldn't spoil the fact that he survives the end of the show, but of course that is spoilt by the nature of this segment, because I'm about to talk about a sequel series that has Valen in it. So unless Justified took a supernatural turn, we can probably safely assume he made it out. But yeah, for the record, before I talk about City Primeval, the slightly more recent bit of media, the original Justified show, yes, very good, very entertaining, very funny. It's driven by sort of Timothy Olyphant's cool, smooth, stoic cowboy personality, but it does have a lot of humour and a lot of clever plotting and a lot of, enjoyable feeling of the big evil money men from the city versus the small local town, and sort of different layers within that, and because obviously some of the townsfolk are also kind of pricks. It's not always the straightforward rich people bad. But yeah, it's a really good show. I watched all 6 seasons, I had a good time, and then I watched the recent series City Primeval, which it's very nice to see Valen again. It's a very enjoyable, sort of straightforward 8 episodes, all done crime story, which just introduces a bunch of storylines and then sort of rounds them out in a novelistic style. I mean, it was a novel. This story was basically a book written by Elmore Leonard, the author who created Valen in a separate book. Elmore Leonard has sadly passed away, and to bring Valen back, they have basically taken a different Elmore Leonard book and inserted Valen Givens into it when he was not previously there. So there's a good, strong, solid story here, which Valen is being walked into, and it's nice to see him again. I do kind of miss the silly, slight sort of larger-than-life characters of Harlan County, though. It's in putting it into this sort of city crime vibe, it's become a bit more of a standard urban crime show, which we've seen a million times on television. But nonetheless, seeing Valen again is good. He does have some good moments. It's nice to see the sort of the way they've aged him and matured him and forced him to come to terms a bit with who he is and what he's done and how he can maybe become a slightly better person and how maybe he is a better person in comparison to some of the rougher city cops he meets in Detroit. And plus, inevitably, he's now got a teenage daughter who follows him around for some of it. So yeah, no, it's a good show. It's good to see Valen again. I won't spoil the new show because that seems like it actually isn't fair, but there are hints that there might be more, and I'd be back for it. I think this is definitely a character Timothy Olyphant can probably just keep returning to for as long as he feels like it.
Yeah, there's been quite a wave of them, bringing back shows that are popular. I guess it's part of the streaming wars and the sort of dash for content. Obviously, we've discussed Dexter: New Blood. My partner is currently watching The Resurrection of Frasier. Yeah, with Nicholas Lyndhurst in it for seemingly no reason. But yeah, and this feels like, part of that. But also, yeah, I guess, as you were saying, there's a story there. They've changed it up enough to make it interesting. I guess one of the reasons that the kind of Dexter resurrection worked is there was drama left unresolved from the original show. Is that the case here? Is there stuff left over that they were addressing, or is it really kind of new town, new story, same old characters.
I mean, it's the same old character. Apart from a few cameos, it's very much just Valen making the comeback here. I think it's very much resurrecting from a flat start, to be honest. There wasn't really much left unresolved at the end of Justified. I think the big difference between Justified and Dexter is that when they said they were bringing back Justified, you sort of think, oh, that ending was good. I hope they don't mess it up. Whereas with Dexter, you sort of think, oh, okay, fair enough. That ending was awful. Maybe this time they'll get it right. So, yeah, happy if they haven't messed it up, I don't think. If only because it's so self-contained. They didn't really unpick much of Justified. They just did a new story with Valen based on the fact that he was alive at the end of Justified. And in that regard, it does, I think, work.
Yes, and also by moving him to a new circumstance and bringing in new characters in a new location, that therefore means they don't have to revisit other characters or situations that are fully resolved.
Yeah, it's fiddly, because on the one hand, it is probably good they didn't just do more Justified with the same characters in the same place doing the same thing, just to have a big session of, remember them? Well, they're back. But on the other hand, I must admit, I did sometimes, as I sort of said, find myself missing Harlan when I was watching this, missing the old hilly-billy comedy idiots messing around and falling over as Valen tries to resist the urge to just laugh in their faces. Because, yeah, that's one of the big Valen things is, partly there's his sort of stony-faced shooting of people who he thinks deserves to be shot, and other times there's just him barely holding back his smirk as these aspiring rubbish criminals just fall over in front of him. That's a big part of the Justified factor as well.
I mean, Timothy Oliphant does do Lawman very well. I mean, I really enjoyed Deadwood and also him picking up a similar character in The Mandalorian. I mean, those are very much, I think, riffing on The Mandalorian one is riffing on what he's known for, playing a lawman.
Well, yeah, I think after both Deadwood and Justified, he is definitely television's #1 cowboy lawman, and will probably be able to just dine out on these parts for as long as he likes, if that's what he wants to do. But, I can respect that he's, come back to Valen and made an effort to do, a good, consistent, coherent, interesting story with it. As I say, it didn't quite fully scratch the Justified itch for me, but it's definitely nice to see everyone again, and it's definitely a good, solid crime novel in itself.
One for the fans? Or is this something you would dive into as a starting point if it's self-contained?
It's interesting. You could definitely watch it as a starting point. I think you might slightly be a bit... The show clearly cares very much about this guy in the cowboy hat, and I don't know if they've entirely persuaded me why I should care. It is definitely playing on your existing investment, but I do still think you could basically enjoy it as a sort of standalone crime show. Okay,
cool. It's cool. I mean, it's a show that I've heard good things about. It's one of those ones that I do want to watch, but unfortunately, there's a lot of it. See also The Americans, The Wire.
So, yeah, these are all shows that I've watched, I think, during the lifetime of this podcast, and have basically had to put aside about between 8 and 12 months of my life in order to do so. So, yeah, who knows what my 2024 massive TV show I should have watched before will be.
Classic Who.
Oh, I'm not doing that.
I don't know how long that would take, but probably longer.
So yeah, stay tuned, listeners. I'm hoping to find some slightly shorter things to knock off before the end of this year, but I'll probably decide it's time to knuckle down and do some other massive TV projects at the start of 2024.
Well, do let us know what it is and how that goes.
If anyone else wants to announce a revival of something to make my decision easier, go ahead. In the meantime, Alastair, what else have you been doing?
So, recently it's been my annual trip to the BFI London Film Festival. I think this was the 67th annual London Film Festival. It's been a good year, a chance to get previews of some stuff that's coming out, although I mainly avoided the high-profile films this year through the clever strategy of booking late when things were sold out. So I didn't get to see Saltburn or Foe or The Killers of Flower Moon. However, they will all be in cinemas soon. I did see some good stuff that I can highly recommend. Probably the highest profile thing I saw is The Zone of Interest, which was absolutely brilliant. It could be one of the most disturbing, if not the most disturbing film I've ever seen.
Really? More than Titane?
Yeah, it was
okay.
Worse than Titane in terms of making you feel uncomfortable. It was nowhere near as violent as Titane, or deliberately trying to press the buttons of making you feel uncomfortable as Titane does. The Zone of Interest is set in the household of Rudolf Hoss, who was the camp commander at Auschwitz. And the plot is basically about the domestic dramas of his family and household that take place inside the home. And in the background, you can just see over the garden walls the tops of the buildings of Auschwitz. Occasionally there's a smokestack with kind of smoke coming out of it. And things like that, and it's very much in the background, but the very unnerving soundtrack. Occasionally there's these sort of like vague sort of popping sounds which you hear, which is I guess people being shot and things like that. And it is very, very disturbing just to see these lives of people living a normal life with their families and doing normal things, whilst possibly the worst thing that has ever happened is happening mere meters from them, and they show no interest in it. Although they do occasionally acknowledge that it's there, they're not just totally blocking it out. The casualness, of people's relationships to mass murder is deeply chilling. Yeah, it's from the director of Sexy Beast and Birth and Under the Skin, Jonathan Glazer. It does only about a film every 10 years. They're always deeply unsettling or weird and sort of strange. So yeah, this is no exception. This film's either going to sweep the Oscars or be not mentioned or acknowledged in any way because people just find it too much. So that's probably the most high profile thing that there's likely to be chatter about when it finally comes out. Saw some other good films as well that I can recommend. A good one that I really liked was Max and Molly in the Future, low budget sci-fi comedy. That was kind of a sci-fi take on When Harry Met Sally.
Oh yep, that was our annual MFV trip to the film festival. I too have seen that, and yeah, I can confirm, really good, really fun, and really. And the thing I always like of having a sort of both a quite sharp sense of humour in terms of the sci-fi and the satire, but also quite a strong emotional core beneath it. It really nails both those things, and as a result, will probably be on the favourite films of the year list.
Yeah, no, it was good. Yeah, great sort of like character relationship story in this sort of bizarre world, and I like a world which treats sci-fi concepts the way we treat everyday things. Like, they talk about their careers and stuff, but one of them is their career is he sits inside a giant mecha type thing and fights other giant mechas for sport. And the other woman is a sort of psychic priestess in this sort of strange cult thing. It's just, but they talk about it like it's just regular jobs, because that's what life's like in a sci-fi universe.
Yeah, it's very much got that everyday sci-fi thing, which is always fun. I mean, I've never seen When Harry Met Sally, because as long-term listeners will know, I've not seen any films. But the way they handled the relationship stuff in this, to me, a newcomer, felt really grounded and interesting, which was both very nice to watch and root for, and also played off quite well against some of the more ridiculous sci-fi stuff.
Yeah, good counterbalancing. So that's definitely a film I could recommend when it comes out, one that probably needs some attention as it's a lower profile film. I also enjoyed The Mission. Saw quite a lot of documentaries this year. A good one called The Mission, which is a documentary about a Christian missionary who went to North Sentinel Island to try and convert the Sentinelese, the people who live there. It's one of the few uncontacted peoples in the world. It's an island where the people are sort of completely isolated, and almost anyone who goes there gets killed because the islanders don't want anyone else to come there. Inevitably, this man was killed. It was in the news in 2018 when it happened, and it's just a really interesting story. Well, the documentary is really interesting in several ways. It's the story of this guy's life and what motivated him to do something that was almost certain to result in death, but also a potted history of the island and all the contact it's had with the outside world, and also a history of the Christian missionary movement, all rolled into one quite neat hour-and-a-half, very interesting film with a lot of good interviews. So that was very interesting. If you want to know what makes people do crazy things, it's a good film for that.
Yeah, you were telling me about this. It sounds very intriguing just from the sort of what would possess someone to do that, what did they think would happen sort of angle.
Yeah. No, it's definitely one of those ones where there's a good story there and a good mystery. Yeah, there's some other good films I saw. I saw a documentary about Paul Simon's life and career called In Restless Dreams. That was good. It was 3.5 hours long.
Hey.
Definitely a bum number. Some people actually walked out. It's the first time I've ever seen someone walked out of a film due to length, unless they were just finally realised they really don't like Paul Simon.
Or they just needed to walk it off till the feeling returned to their bums.
Yeah. That was quite a long film, but it was good if you like Paul Simon and his music, and he's had an interesting career. So that was good. Saw a really good documentary called Scala, which is about the Scala theatre that ran from the 70s to the early 90s. It's now a music venue outside King's Cross. Legendary theatre showing everything from kind of band films, I guess things that went on video with video nasties, horror, sort of transgressive films, but also a lot of John Waters films and films. It was kind of a beacon of gay culture, and really a place showing films that other places wouldn't touch because they dealt openly with gay characters and things like that. So it was a kind of alternative, gothy, sort of punk, sort of queer, sort of just strange little kind of countercultural institution that's got an interesting history. A lot of famous people seem to have gone to cinema at various points that they interviewed in the film. Everyone from Stuart Lee to Ben Wheatley, James O'Brien, lots of activists and stuff, Adam Buxton. So the fact that it's got a lot of people who have celebrities with fond memories of the cinema meant it was an interesting film because there's a lot of interesting talking heads. So that was a good film. So yeah, overall, there's definitely some stuff I can recommend this year. People who've been following the Twitter will know about that. But yeah, I can certainly recommend, definitely keep an eye out for Max and Molly in the future. And yeah, definitely watch The Zone of Interest come into the discourse near you, because this is going to get people talking, because it's really something to watch and be made deeply, deeply upset by.
If that's not a recommendation, I don't know what is.
Let's roll on to Cool, got that on the hot mic.
Yep, there we go. That's me disrespecting an actually good comic with my horrible vocal noises. Okay, and first up, in the big 200th, it's time for my recommendation, which is the classic 2010s comic series Transformers More Than Meets the Eye. As I already said in my brief intro last week, this is not me forcing my hardcore Transformers fandom on Alastair, because I really don't have any. I am not a Transformers fan. There is no other bit of Transformers media I would rate higher than, yeah, it's fine I guess, on my internal scale. This is the only Transformers thing I really like. This is the comic series by James Roberts and mostly Alex Milne, although other artists do get involved. This is about a small group of Transformers, mostly the more obscure ones, although there are a few of the vaguely well-known ones here, who, after the end of the millennia-long Autobot-Decepticon war, in a search for a bit of purpose in their lives and a chance to, they do something else other than just fight, take off on a small ship called the Lost Light on a slightly quixotic, vaguely defined quest to find the mysterious Knights of Cybertron and get some purpose into the Cybertronian race. And yet, they take off, and wacky, accident-prone adventures, banter, and some surprisingly grim shit awaits in these pages. We have read the first 2 volumes of the collections, which I believe is the first 8 issues of the series, plus the sort of one-shot that kicked off this era of the comics, which was called The Death of Optimus Prime. Spoilers, it's mostly a figurative death. So yep, we've read those comics. Alastair, what did you think of them?
Yeah, so I'm also not a huge Transformers aficionado. I watched the cartoon as a child, and kind of liked it, especially that film with Orson Welles in it. And other than the few bits of media we discussed on the podcast, I think I watched the first of the Michael Bay films and didn't like it. But yeah, this is hands down definitely the best bit of Transformers media I've consumed in probably ever. It's got a really good kind of fast-paced, action-heavy plot in that it kind of moves very quickly from event to event to event. It's almost, I guess, episodic in that each issue kind of has a thing that they encounter, and then there's kind of a self-contained plot sometimes, and obviously there are things that roll over from episode to episode or issue to issue. But yeah, it keeps moving, it keeps going through a fast pace. It's got quite a big cast, which means there's always kind of, I guess, ways they can put the characters together in interesting different circumstances and explore things. But yeah, it means that there's always somewhere that the action can go. There's something interesting happening which keeps it pacey and very entertaining. Yeah, there'll be a major scene going on with the plot arc of one particular issue, and then there'll be it, but they can break from that to go to some of the other characters who are also involved in something interesting and exciting. So that keeps it, means it's fast paced, holds your attention, and is a lot of fun.
Yeah, no, the one thing you can't say about this comic is that it's uneventful. It is, to be honest, it's almost a retro comic to read in some ways. Comics in the last 20 years, I'd say, roughly since the turn of the century, have, I think, turned towards what I would glibly describe as a slightly more cinematic pacing, slightly more spelling out scenes, spacing out beats to give more atmosphere and provide more chance for character moments. And More Than Meets the Eye, to be honest, is actually cramming the action in a way that almost feels old school. A lot of things happen on every page, there's a lot of dialogue, there's a lot of often different things happening in every panel and characters crammed in. There's both an A plot in every issue, plus there's often a B plot, a C plot, and possibly a few letters beyond that as well. Tiny little things that get a couple of panels that will pay off in 10 issues time. It's a very old school ongoing comic, and I loves it.
Yeah, it reminds me of again some very tightly written sitcoms, especially American sitcoms, when you can like The Simpsons or whatever, that you can layer within 20 minutes 3 kind of plot levels, and the third most important plot is maybe only has 3 scenes or so, beginning, middle and end, but each one's kind of a sharp bit, and then there's a complete story. One of the recurring characters is someone who's been in suspended animation throughout the entire Autobot Decepticon war, so kind of skipped over most of the events, I guess, of the Transformers universe that we know about, and is now catching up on things. And there's an episode when he decides he wants to become a Decepticon, partly because he doesn't really understand what that means, having been out of the loop. And then I think that's the end of one issue, it's the twist, and then the next one, there's kind of, they discuss it, then there's a scene of them confronting him about this, and then there's a sort of a scene that pays that off, and that's, then it's quite a neat little story arc, and that's contained pretty much within one issue. And then within that issue there's also there's a bigger, more dramatic plot line as well, so that's the level of tight storytelling that we're talking about here.
Yeah, and I think there's a thing in common with sitcoms, I think, in that, it does lay all these characters through and give them all things to do of varying importance. I think James Roberts has described Red Dwarf as one of his influences, but also it takes it all quite seriously in a lot of ways. The depth of the lore is, especially as someone who isn't a fan, something I was surprised to find I really enjoy in this. The big thing he does is take Transformers very seriously and bring in some thoughts about their politics and their society, and I think fundamentally what it means to be an entire people based around a war for decades. Everyone's clearly sort of walking around going, Jesus, what do we do when we're not trying to kill each other? Yeah,
there's definitely a sense of everyone's trying to move on from this big destructive war that's consumed them. And I feel like it kind of feeds in the background and the stuff you need to know in a quite sort of deft way. You don't need to know the details of it. What it sort of really reminds me of is a historic novel set around a war or after a war, in that when you pick up a novel set in the past, some knowledge of the period is helpful, but the author doesn't expect you to have a detailed understanding of whenever it's set, the Napoleonic Wars or the 30 Years' War or whenever. And what the task of the writer is to kind of bring in the relevant information in a kind of way that isn't just info dumping to the reader and hitting them over the head, but giving them the information they need to kind of flesh out the world. I think science fiction writers tend to have a sense of people must understand this whole world and everything about it and stuff to get the story, because they feel it's all interconnected, and it is all interconnected. But in the real world, you don't need to know everything, and with historical novels do it better. And I think this handles it well in the same way, again, like watching a film set in the past, in that it brings in the stuff you need to know, but without kind of hitting you over the head with it, but also without feeling the need to explain absolutely everything, so that you can focus on telling a story.
Well, yeah, I think it helps that he's clearly very good at character writing, and all the characters, especially, there's a lot of characters in this, but especially the core characters who appear throughout are very well defined, and very well defined very quickly. I say this as someone who had no idea who almost any of them were before I read this comic, and as a result, because the characters are so well defined, it's quite easy to then sort of introduce the lore and the background and the world and stuff by just having them talk about it and having them encounter things and describe what it is.
It's natural for them to discuss though things that have happened recently, because it's also how people interact and things like that. We discuss our recent history and we discuss things that you've been to together. The characters are quite well defined, especially this kind of the core ones, like the captain of the ship. He's sort of reckless and an adventurer, and he's bold and is dislike for authority. His second in command is kind of the opposite, and he's kind of by the book and very strict and things like that. So you've got kind of character dynamics there. They build up all the different characters, some of them more ridiculous, some of them more tragic. There's several hundred Cybertronians or Transformers, whatever you want to call them, on the ship. So that means they can just similar to things like Battlestar Galactica does, they can just kind of pluck characters out of the background and make them part of the plot when it needs an injection of a new storyline, some new characters.
Yeah, I assume these are all someone's favourite from the action figure line, but obviously I have no idea. But yeah, every so often they'll just go, it's time for Ratchet and Drift, who are two of the more main characters, to go on an adventure with Pipes, who has just turned up out of nowhere. Which does obviously give you a certain sense that Pipes might be a bit of a red shirt, but...
Yeah,
that's one of the two passes, actually, where Ratchet, Drift and Pipes go to investigate a possible medical emergency and find out that it is indeed pretty grim.
Yeah, that's a pretty grim one, yeah. I mean, there's this kind of, self-contained stories, the one about the base where there's a virus unleashed. Yeah, you kind of find out what the deal with the virus is, that it starts to make people sick when they transform, so you can't actually, change into a vehicle, or as they call them, alt modes?
Yeah,
I think it is their internal jargon. So yeah, that's a sort of two-parter that kind of is a sort of aside from the main plot. There's one when they find there's the Spark Eater, a sort of predatory, kind of Cybertronian creature that feeds off the life force that kind of animates them, and they have to kind of track it down and kind of within the ship, sort of a little bit like a Alien. That one, that's a good episode. There's the one when they encounter the DJD, a sort of extremist wing of Decepticons that punish other Decepticons they believe to be traitors. That's also quite a grim one.
Yeah, those aren't actually characters from the Lost Light. They're just a bunch of random Decepticons encountering the DJD, which is a particularly ridiculous broadening of the scope. Just what we needed, a bunch of characters who aren't even on the ship.
I assume that, links in later.
Eventually, yeah, those characters, the scavengers, as they're called, I think, sort of turn up every few issues for a large chunk of the series before it eventually slides into the main narrative. It's just one of the many sort of ongoing quirks of this series. But yeah, the DJD are one of the main sort of villainous presences. They're built up quite a lot. Like, I think they're mentioned quite a few times before they finally appear on panel, with like focus on how fucking terrifying they are. And obviously, they're again another big sort of wartime horror, this sort of group of extremist fundamentalists who refuse to accept that the war is over, even though everyone else has agreed it is. Just to, torture and kill everyone who's betrayed Megatron.
Yes, and obviously, we know there are people who do that sort of thing in reality. They refuse to give up and keep fighting on some level. Again, it's riffing on things that we're aware of for our world. So yeah, there's a lot of good plot lines.
Yeah, and the art by Alex Milne is very good. It's not because of the density I mentioned, the sheer volume of panels and characters and dialogue and stuff happening. He doesn't necessarily get that many enormous showcase panels or sequences where he can really space out an action to show off his amazing sequential artwork. But yeah, he's incredibly good at the storytelling and the beat for beat keeping track of this huge amount of robots and everything they're doing and which one is which and where they are and how it ties in. And he can do, there's a lot of comedy beats in this, sort of moment for moment, like the little character Tailgate's head desking violently as he tries to listen to an incredibly boring lesson in the Autobot code. Alex Milne's incredibly good at that stuff as well.
Yeah, it's very good artwork and things like that. I think that what's great is there's a lot of characters, and obviously they're all robots or Cybertronians that aren't necessarily human, and he's done a really good job of making each one kind of distinctive and memorable, so that you know kind of who they are. And also the other thing is there's different degrees of facial expressions that they have. Some of them clearly have faces that can have a wide range of expressions, but some of them are just sort of metal grills or whatever for the face. So
the Optimus Prime face, yeah, just a metal plate.
Yeah, it's very stoic. But there was a lot of great stuff, I think, done in terms of kind of how a character stands or how they relate physically to other characters, so that as you're reading it, you instantly get the emotional dynamic of a scene, which you don't have to puzzle out what's going on, even though it would be quite difficult had it not been handled so well. It's a difficult challenge, but yeah, there are many ways to express emotion, especially when you don't have access to close-ups of someone's face.
Yeah, I mean, full disclosure, I had to read the first few issues, I think the first volume basically twice the first time I read this, to be sure I'd worked out who everyone was, because I don't know, there's a lot of robots, they all look very similar. I've genuinely never engaged seriously with Transformers before. I think it is because of the sheer density of it. To be honest, that is quite a fun exercise. It's a series that kind of rewards rereading, I think, just because there's so much stuff, and when you reread it from the beginning, having already read it, you can sort of see him seeding stuff even more than you probably did when you first read it.
Yeah. It helps that also the end of each issue, there's a kind of little character bio thing.
Yeah, the little headshots and roll call thing they pop in is very, very handy, yes.
Yeah, and also there's a lot of sort of dramatic stuff that's set up that I think would be interesting to revisit in a reread. There's a bit right towards the beginning when they receive a message from the future warning them about things, warning them not to go on the trip at all, even just after they've left, but also warning them not to do various things in a quite a cryptic way. So obviously you're listening for the various things it tells them not to do. One is don't open the sarcophagus, or don't open the coffin, don't go down to the basement. It's another one. So you're listening for when those are going to pay off.
I think you may have already had the payoff, well, some of the payoff of don't go down to the basement.
Yeah, we've had don't go down to the basement, I think, but the coffin's not being addressed, and
No, I think it's all addressed eventually, but some of it does take a good few volumes. This has definitely been planned out in some detail, or at the very least he had ideas, clearly. So yeah, no, as you may be able to tell from my fanish infusing, I love this comic. I've read it 3 or 4 times all the way through. I'm tossing it up whether to now immediately continue rereading the rest of it.
Yeah, no, it's good. It's different from, I don't know exactly what I was expecting. It's definitely different from a lot of other Transformers media. There's not much transforming in it. It's mainly focused on the Cybertronians and their relations to each other as kind of as people. And I mean, it is really good at conveying these creatures, robots, whatever you want to call them, as people, even though they're very strange to us. They're machines, they're not humans, they're from a machine society. They're extraordinarily long-lived. They're millions and millions of years old. They've been fighting for millions of years. It would be something that could be very difficult to relate to, but they've kind of found, the writer and the artist have found a way to really find the kind of human stories in there about Transformers, and that's what's relatable.
Further on in the series, I don't know, probably not too much spoilers, I guess. He will go a bit further into the, what it means to be a Transformer and what it means to have an alt mode and whether that defines your identity. There's a whole idea about that there used to be a society which was a functionalist society where your alt mode just defines what you did, and Decepticonism was basically a rebellion against that. And it sort of sets up Megatron as someone who arguably had a valid point, although in true Magneto style he may have gone a bit overboard with it. But yeah, there's a lot of thinking about that stuff, and again, I think that's some of the stuff that makes it work and makes these people seem like a surprisingly credible society, or at least one you can sort of emotionally invest in.
Yeah, there's some of that already, especially when they talk to, I've forgotten the name, the character who's been in suspended animation for 5 million years.
Tailgate.
Yes, Tailgate. Yeah, I was going to say that, but I thought I'd be embarrassed myself if I was wrong. Anyway. So yeah, there's bits where they're explaining to him, kind of what's happened and the origins of the war, and they do kind of couch it in terms of like a rebellion, a different points of view, a factional dispute that became an armed conflict as things happen, rather than pitching it as goodies and baddies. It's more subtle than, then I guess there definitely than some Transformers media, such as the Michael Bay film, when it is just, the Autobots are the good guys and Decepticons are coming to kill everyone.
Well, yeah, and also a lot of the films and other media tends to have the old Transformers and their human friends angle. There's a lot of that.
Yeah, and this is definitely not there. I mean, like I say, there's very little transforming. I assume the transforming thing partly is so they can come to Earth and like blend in and things like that. Here, it's just their society, them being themselves, and it's their society on its own terms, and it's presented as this is what it's like in their universe. It's not us looking in to their world from the outside, from the perspective of a human. It's us looking into their world from the inside, from a perspective of being a Transformer and seeing what it's like. And it is very compelling and remarkably consistent, considering it began as just like toys.
Yeah, I mean, there have been a lot of reboots of it over the years. There's a lot of versions of Transformers that don't resemble this at all. I guess the advantage of that is that James Roberts can just kind of pick it up and go a bit off on one by himself with it.
Yeah, I mean, it's helped that this is it's a separate setting that's self-contained, on this spaceship. It's different characters, or at least not many main characters, and also they go through a thing that's used in a lot of sci-fi, which is the first time they try to jump the ship, there's a malfunction and they're in a different part of space, they're lost, they're not sure where they're going, they encounter other things. It's kind of like, as well as us seeing inside the Transformers world, we're also kind of pushing into new areas and opening up new things. So this is it means this can kind of be a story in its own right, which I think also works why it's something you can just pick up and read if you don't know much about Transformers or the fandom, because it's separate characters, it's a separate situation.
Yeah, weirdly the lack of big recognisable names kind of works for it in that regard. I guess maybe because it gives you more space to just get to know them as quirky little guys.
Yeah, you don't come with any preconceptions to the characters. They start out as a sort of, blank canvas that the writer and artist can kind of build character on. Which they do, also, again, in this really quick and efficient way, because the kind of main thing of this is kind of the driving plot that moves on quickly. So there is not a lot of space for characterization. But again, like I say, they do a really good job of making, from both art and stance and expression through to, kind of dialogue, making them seem like real people and seem like this is like a believable world that you've just kind of walked into.
Yeah, God, I love it. Maybe I will read the rest of it.
I definitely want to carry on.
Okay, well, I'll lend you them, it's fine.
Yeah, you can lend them to me. It's whether do I go back to Transmetropolitan first?
Between you and you, which comic that starts with trans you read first?
Oh, yeah. That's a good point. Finally, this episode, we will be discussing Wes Anderson's film The Royal Tenenbaums. Gene Hackman plays Royal Tenenbaum, who is estranged from his family of gifted New Yorkers. His children's genius has been squandered, and now they live broken and depressed lives. However, after losing all his money, Royal decides to worm his way back into his family's life by pretending that he's dying of cancer. This is Wes Anderson's third film from over 20 years ago. So Nick, what did you think of it?
Yep, I enjoyed this. It's strong characters. It's a lot of very good actors. It's a lot of actors who are now towards the top of the game in roles when I assume they were, I don't know, if not unknown, then at least on the up. And yeah, it worked. They had an interesting ensemble. It gave me a nice warm feeling from the emotion at the end. I think the Awful Dad's slight redemption works quite well because Wes Anderson didn't have him full on, I don't know, become an amazing guy. He just sort of softened slightly and maybe realised a bit what a dick he'd been. And yeah, that sort of realistic level of standard redemption arc, I thought works quite well. It is another film which has a sort of slightly interesting dark comedy vibe, which sometimes leads to borderline dissonance. There's a scene where one character full on slits his wrist, and the film just sort of peers at him curiously. It's extremely odd viewing. It's kind of entertaining and also kind of unsettling. And there's a lot of good sort of non sequitur comedy, sort of wry, understated lines, which mostly land, helped of course again by the very good cast. I enjoyed the final scene with a bit of enjoyable comic action. Must admit, I still sometimes find Wes Anderson's general thing a bit cold and remote and makes it hard for me to move from liking to loving these films. But nonetheless, this is, I think, probably one of my favourite ones of his I've seen.
This is generally regarded as, his best or his strongest film. I mean, people have different opinions. Some people really like the Darjeeling Limited or Grand Budapest Hotel. I mean, it was hard to choose one that was like a favourite. But I feel this one is kind of the one that really made his name as like a, this kind of independent filmmaker with an unusual style, is a good example. And the style is not as pronounced or as arch in this film as it is in later ones, such as The French Dispatch or Asteroid City. I feel that it's not quite as like intense, which makes it, there are some scenes that are kind of played pretty much as straight dramatic scenes without the kind of his need for his like unusual camera angles or idiosyncratic humor or dialogue, which makes it like kind of more accessible. It's still riffing on stuff that issues he returns to, such as like the story within the story, as this is kind of supposed to be like a book. There are sort of like odd camera angles and kind of things presented in a strange way, but it seems to be, I feel this is like, it's less arch, so it's kind of more kind of engaging as a film or kind of on its own terms.
Well, yeah, I mean, even though I've only seen, I think, 3 Wes Anderson films, one of which was animation, Isle of Dogs, I am vaguely familiar with the aesthetic, and it's still definitely in there. Like, there's a lot of like heavy focus on characters being framed within this sort of wider shot, often sitting very still while the shot sort of frames around them. Always a lot of that in his films, and you can see that here, especially when he's sort of introducing characters. But yeah, as you say, after that they are allowed to move around a bit more, and there's a bit less of the characters just as figures within these sort of tableaus.
Yeah. And also I feel that like there's quite a lot of big names in this, but it's not quite the kind of star-studded list that he moved on to. Kind of there's more time spent with each character and developing them, because even though there's like a lot of big names in this, there's Bill Murray, there's Ben Stiller, Owen Wilson, Luke Wilson, Gwyneth Paltrow, Danny Glover, Gene Hackman we've already mentioned. I mean, there's probably more names that I'm forgetting. There's kind of more of a focus on each character, and they're built up more, and their relations are built up more. It helps that this is a family story. You can always weave in people as extended members of the family. There's always like that connection back to the kind of the core few characters.
Again, sometimes with Wes Anderson films, they feel a bit sprawling and a bit, here's a vague collection of people doing thematically vaguely related things in a similar area, whereas this, I think, has, quite a strong narrative through line. Royal Tenembaums is clearly the main character. His name is kind of in the title, and a lot of it is about the way they view him and the way that their opinions change or don't change due to his latest massive stunt.
Yeah. And Gene Hackman is great. I mean, Hollywood legend. He must be retired now, but kind of playing this kind of quite unsympathetic and sort of playing against type a bit. It's a long way from the French Connection.
Yeah, no, he's definitely very good in this. I think this, as I say, the dad's sort of somewhat redemption arc is very much the pivotal point of the whole film, and he plays it really well. He sort of loosens up and plays it a little less sort of stiff and, I don't know, hard to relate to as he goes on his little journey. Yeah,
the cast is good overall. Ben Stiller, I think, is great in this, considering Ben Stiller, especially at the time, was doing a lot of like really big kind of over the top comic performances. I mean, this is around the same time as Zoolander and other things like that, where he did this kind of very big comedic performances, which for me I kind of felt, I don't know, they didn't work for me. It's not necessarily my sense of humour, but I kind of like how here he shows how good he is at both acting and comedy, doing this kind of quite understated role of this guy who really is quite depressed because his wife's died and is in a really bad emotional place.
Yeah, no, Ben Stiller is enjoyable in this, doing not quite what I usually associate with him, sort of surprisingly downbeat, subdued Ben Stiller. But I didn't know the timeline, so I don't know whether this was before he started doing his manic thing in movie after movie. But yeah, he's very good here. Yeah,
and it was a big, I think, moment. I mean, getting Bill Murray for the previous film Rushmore was one thing, but this is kind of Ben Stiller at kind of, certainly if not career height, then just before it. And lots of other people, very successful people, who do really great performances in this film. Luke Wilson, Owen Wilson, Gwyneth Paltrow. Everyone does depression very well. It is, I forgot how sad a film it was, but everyone does portray depression very well.
Well, yeah, that's kind of, I think, one of the reasons it kind of works, really. There's the sort of, it does have the sort of Wes Anderson coldness, but honestly, the reason all their relations feel a bit cold and distant is quite clearly because they're all on some level depressed. And I think the aesthetic works with the story in a way that I think is very good.
And also, I feel the sad and depressed nature of the film is kind of offsets the sort of the whimsy. The two worked well together in that way, rather than just make it sort of like just pure whimsy.
Yeah, it both conveys its message about depression, but also, because it's got that slight edge of whimsy, stops it from becoming a crushing downer.
Yeah.
It reminds me vaguely of the bits of Arrested Development I've seen. Another show I've never watched properly, but probably should.
Yeah, there's definitely lots of similar things there. I mean, it's a similar thing when there's like, you've got a family, each one sort of bizarre person in a kind of, so slightly different way. So the comedy is very much from how their different bizarrenesses kind of bounce off each other. Yeah, there's a sort of similar thing. Again, tight family drama, but sort of large extended family.
Yeah, and as I say, I'm not an expert in Arrested Development. I think Arrested Development is maybe a bit sillier, but it has also got this similar sort of cold awkwardness going on occasionally.
Yeah, and also but also sort of loops back to this sort of, there's warmth in it, in certainly the ending as well. It ends on a sort of optimistic note.
Well, yeah, again, it's not trying to make too crushing a point about the nature of humanity. It actually does have quite a pleasant, uplifting ending, all told.
Yeah.
Yeah, up to a point. Yeah. Yeah, no, I really enjoyed this. As I say, it's probably going to the top of my personal Wes Anderson charts, which has a grand total of 4 films on it now.
I think it's definitely the one to see. There's so many things about it. Like, there's got lots of little nice things in it, like Alec Baldwin narrating. The music is great. I mean, it's got everything from like Hey Jude, Nico, Paul Simon, The Ramones, Elliott Smith, Rolling Stones, Lou Reed, The Clash, and Van Morrison on the soundtrack. So yeah, he's always good for the needle drops, Wes Anderson. Yeah, there's lots of and I think the kind of the weirdness works well because it's kind of subdued a bit. Like, one of the things that's really funny is the Bill Murray character. Everywhere he goes, he's just with this kid who he's doing experiments on, who has some strange psychological condition, and the kid's just always there, like in the background, or turning up at various points, and it's just very funny that this kid's always there and who's slightly odd, and then at the end it's just, you find out that he went on a lecture tour with the kid. Sort of little things like that. Just kind of those sort of small moments of whimsical humour really work.
Yeah, and he's there at the very end as well, in the very last scene. And I did just sit there thinking, why is he there? Why would he be there? Why not, I guess.
He's just part of the wedding scene. He's just another person to it's sort of like he's part of their lives, this sort of ragtag group of people.
Yes, the classic found family.
Yeah. Another found family story we got.
I mean, that's kind of what More Than Meets the Eye is as well, to be honest. They're everywhere.
Yeah, no, it's a good theme that like lots of filmmakers, writers, artists and stuff return to. This kind of how bonds you form are not necessarily the people you're related to, but the people you spend time with and are brought together by.
I'm not sure if this counts as a found family story since it's about an actual family, but who knows? Yeah,
well, it's a family finding itself, I guess, because that's been after all their genius and success is squandered. I like how that is never revealed what the series of betrayals and missed opportunities were that led to everyone being depressed, but it's just sort of laid out there.
Yeah, no, as I say, at times it's very stark about the realities of depression, especially, as I say, when it gets to full-on suicide attempts. That's a weird sequence. Yeah,
that bit is very dark, and I found very uncomfortable, difficult to watch. But yeah, I mean, it really does show what depression's like and where it can lead and stuff. I mean, it's made also more grimmer by The Needle in the Hay by Elliott Smith, who also committed suicide. This kind of adds to that really sad bit, yeah.
So yeah, it's good, but it's also sad. If that's the sort of thing you like, sign up.
But yeah, this is one where the whimsy works well, so I think that's why it's the one I think people should see. If you see any Wes Anderson film, this is kind of the one that really nails it.
Yes, if you only see one Wes Anderson film, watch The Royal Tenenbaums. If you only consume one bit of Transformers media, then read Transformers More Than Meets the Eye.
Yes, I think, we found another connection there. That's all we have time for, as we have reached the end of this 200th episode of Moderate Fantasy Violence. As always, please subscribe in your podcatcher of choice and leave us a nice review. If you want more from us, then visit our website, moderatefantasyviolence.com, where you can find the other 199 issues of the podcast, bonus audio clips, and short written pieces by Nick and myself.
And you can also follow us on the social media, where we are MFV Podcast on Twitter /X/whatever, and Moderate Fantasy Violence on Facebook. You can also follow me on the socials, where I am, again, Nick MB on Twitter, or Nick Bryan on Blue Sky, or nickbryan.com on Instagram. And if you happen to be coming to MCM London Comic Con, which I believe starts the day after we release this episode, then I will be in Artist Alley at table J18. Please come and buy my comics. Even though it's quite close to home, I still don't want to have to carry them all back there. Thank you.
You can get more from me by following me on Twitter, Blue Sky or Threads, where I'm Alastair Ball. You can get more of my writing at redtrainblog.com or find my theatre reviews at everythingtheatre.com. Or you can join us here next time for the 201st episode of Moderate Fantasy Violence, where we will be living in a haunted house with our ghost friends in the final season of the BBC sitcom Ghosts, and then we'll be taking a journey into space, this time not with Transformers but with Saoirse Ronan in Foe. Join us in 2 weeks for that. Until then, enjoy the time of being 200. That made no sense.
That sounds like something a Transformer would say.
It does sound like something a Transformer would say.
All right, everybody. Transform and roll out.
Bye.
Bye.
Not sure. Not sure if that ending works, but there it is. It's on the record. It's on the record. It's on the record now. It's on the record.
It's a Transformers podcast now.
Yeah. Cool. What's next?
Just kidding. No more Transformers possibly ever again.